The wind howled through the towering pines, rattling their skeletal branches like fingers tapping at a window. A silvery mist rolled across the damp earth, blanketing everything in its eerie embrace. It was the kind of night where silence itself seemed alive, pressing against eardrums and daring anyone to speak. "Are you sure about this?" Lisa whispered, her voice a mere shiver in the dark. Her flashlight flickered, throwing shadows that leapt and twisted across the crumbling facade of Blackwood Manor. The manor loomed ahead, its cracked stone walls shrouded in ivy and rot, windows shattered like broken eyes watching them. Alex, always the fearless leader of their group, grinned and pushed ahead. His footsteps crunched on the gravel, the sound loud enough to make Lisa flinch. "What's the matter, Lisa? Ghosts don't scare you, do they?" Toby chuckled nervously from behind, his tall frame hunching slightly as if the trees themselves were closing in. "Let's just get this over with. I don't like how quiet it is tonight." A crow cawed in the distance, its cry abrupt and sharp, cutting through the stillness. The three friends exchanged uneasy glances. No one dared to mention the legend, though each of them knew it by heart, the story of how the entire Delacroix family had vanished one winter night, leaving only the echoes of their screams trapped within these walls. Alex reached the rusted iron gate and shoved it open. It groaned in protest, the sound more human than metal, like an anguished soul being disturbed. Lisa hesitated, her eyes fixed on the carved family crest that adorned the gates, a raven clutching a serpent in its beak. It was said that the last Delacroix had added that detail, claiming it would ward off the darkness that lurked within. But it hadn't. Inside, the air was colder, tinged with the scent of mildew and something far more unsettling, something metallic and sharp, like old blood. Alex's flashlight beam swept across the grand foyer, revealing a staircase that spiraled upward into darkness. The wallpaper, once luxurious velvet, now hung in tatters, claw marks raked across its surface. "Look at this," Lisa whispered, pointing to the floor. Thin, almost invisible lines traced the dust, like someone or something had been dragged across it. Toby's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his fingers flexing nervously around the handle of his flashlight. "This place is worse than the stories." A sudden thud echoed from above, followed by a low, shuffling sound that seemed to move across the ceiling. Their lights shot upward, catching the faintest glimpse of a shadow, thin and sinuous, slithering out of sight. "Was that?" Toby began, but Alex raised a hand to silence him. "Let's keep going." They inched forward, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The hallway beyond the foyer was lined with portraits of the Delacroix family, their painted eyes following the trio with lifelike intensity. At the end of the hall, a grand door stood ajar, a flicker of golden light dancing just beyond it. "Who's in there?" Lisa breathed, the question as much for herself as for the others. Suddenly, the light vanished, plunging them back into darkness. The silence roared, deafening and suffocating, as a voice, soft and cracked with age, whispered behind them, "You shouldn't have come." Lisa spun around so fast she nearly dropped her flashlight. Its beam danced wildly, splashing light across cracked walls and gaping doorways. Nothing moved. The silence was thick again, punctuated only by their shallow breathing. "Did anyone else hear that?" Toby asked, his voice an octave higher than usual. He stepped backward until he was nearly pressed against the wall, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Alex's jaw tightened, "We're just psyching ourselves out," he said, though his voice trembled enough to betray him. "All houses creak. They make sounds." "Not like that," Lisa shot back. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she scanned the hall once more, half expecting the whisper to materialize in front of them that dot. The door at the end of the hall, the one that had glimmered with golden light, creaked open further. A low groan of wood on iron hinges sent a shiver racing down Lisa's spine. The room beyond was dark, but not empty. It pulsed with an energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Let's go back," Toby said. His voice was a plea now, all bravado washed away. "We saw enough. We can say we..." His words were cut short by a sudden, forceful slam. The grand front door behind them had shut on its own, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the cavernous space. Alex's flashlight flickered, then failed, leaving them in near darkness. "Don't move," Alex whispered, fear cutting through his usual confidence like a blade. A scuffling sound started low at first, like the whisper of silk dragging across the floor, then grew louder, moving swiftly toward them from the shadows of the corridor. It was coming from behind the portraits. One by one, they seemed to turn their heads, eyes rolling in their frames to track the intruders. Lisa gasped, backing into Alex. "They're watching us," she whimpered. The realization wasn't just paranoia. The paintings were moving. "Run!" Alex yelled, grabbing Lisa's hand and pulling her down the hall. Toby sprinted ahead, nearly tripping as he burst through the half-open door and into the dark room beyond. The air inside was cold, but the oppressive silence had given way to a chorus of low, indistinct whispers. They weren't alone. The room was a study, the remnants of once grand bookshelves lining the walls, their spines decayed and split. An ornate desk sat in the center, its surface scattered with brittle papers. Atop it was a single candle, unlit, with melted wax pulled around its base. But it wasn't the candle or the desk that captured their attention. It was the figure standing in the corner, half-shadowed, with eyes that gleamed like polished glass. "Who are you?" Lisa managed to whisper, barely audible over the blood pounding in her ears. The figure stepped forward and moonlight spilled through a shattered window, illuminating its face. It was a woman in a tattered evening gown, her skin pale as death, hair cascading around her shoulders in tangled curls. Her lips parted and the voice that came out was a chorus, many voices speaking as one. "You seek what you do not understand," it said, eyes locking onto Alex. "You woke us." Alex took a step back, breath shuddering. We didn't mean to. We'll go, just let us." The figure's eyes narrowed. "No one leaves until the debt is paid." Suddenly, the room tilted and the whispers grew deafening. The walls pulsed with shadows that reached out like clawed hands, their darkness seeping across the floor. Lisa screamed as one wrapped around her ankle, cold and suffocating. "Alex," she shrieked, her voice breaking. He lunged forward, trying to pull her free, but the shadow clung tightly. Toby fell to the floor, scrambling backward as the figure stepped closer, now just inches away. She leaned down, her breath icy on Alex's face. "You will carry our story," she whispered. "You will be the key." And then, as suddenly as it began, the room fell silent. The shadows receded, the figure vanished, and the three friends found themselves alone in the study, gasping for breath. The door behind them creaked open, revealing the hall now bathed in pale moonlight. Alex looked down at his arm, where a mark was seared into his skin, a raven clutching a serpent. The same mark as the Delacroix family crest. "We have to go," Lisa said, voice shaking. But as they stumbled out of the manor, the whispers followed, a reminder that they would never truly escape. Weeks passed, but none of them spoke of that night. They tried to return to their normal lives, but the mark on Alex's arm began to change, turning from black to a deep, throbbing red. At night, they all heard the whispers, no matter how far apart they were. "Why is this happening?" Lisa asked one night as they gathered in Alex's living room, exhaustion etched on all their faces. "It's not over," Toby said, eyes hollow. "The manor story isn't finished." And as the clock struck midnight, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent, demanding the debt they had promised to pay. Alex sat in his dimly lit room, staring at the mark on his arm. The crimson raven and serpent seemed to pulse in the dark, each beat sensing with his racing heart. His phone vibrated on the table, startling him. It was Lisa. "Alex, it's happening again." Her voice trembled. "I can't sleep. They're in the room. I hear them." He gripped the phone tighter, glancing around nervously. "We need to go back to Blackwood Manor. Whatever we woke up that night, it won't stop until we face it." "No," Lisa whispered. "It's madness. You saw what it did to us. It'll be worse if we don't," Toby said, appearing at Alex's door, dark circles under his eyes. He looked thinner, gaunt, like he hadn't slept or eaten in days. "I hear them too. We need to finish this." The decision was made, not out of courage, but out of necessity. The next night, as the town lay silent under a shroud of frost, they returned to the manor, hearts heavy with dread. Blackwood Manor loomed larger under the moonlight, its decaying stone glistening like wet bones. The gate creaked open with a touch, as if inviting them back in. This time, the whispers began the moment they stepped inside, a low hum that vibrated through the floorboards and up their spines. The grand foyer had changed. The staircase that once spiraled into darkness now led up to an open doorway glowing with the same golden light they had seen before. Lisa swallowed hard. "We go up?" They moved together, each creak of the wooden steps echoing like a drumbeat. As they reached the top, the air grew colder, their breath visible in small, frightened puffs. The golden light spilled from the room at the end of the hollow room that hadn't been there before. They stepped inside and found themselves in a grand parlor, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected warped, shadowy versions of themselves. In the center stood a table set for a feast, covered in rotting food and dusty goblets. And at the head of the table, a woman sat, eyes as dark as coal, dressed in a gown of midnight velvet. "You returned," she said, her voice a soft rasp that carried the weight of centuries. "I did not expect such resolve." Alex stepped forward, every instinct telling him to run. "Why us? What do you want?" The woman's gaze shifted to the mark on his arm. "You carry the seal of the Delacroix, a bond made long ago, a debt unpaid. The heir made a bargain he could not fulfill, and now you bear his mark." Toby's eyes widened. "But we're not Delacroix. We're not part of this." The woman's smile was cold and humorless. "You trespassed on cursed ground. You became part of it the moment you stepped foot here. Now you must choose. Offer your blood, or carry the whispers with you for eternity. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Alex clenched his fists. What does it mean to offer blood? She lifted a hand, pale and bony, pointing to the mirrors. They shifted, showing scenes of the manor's dark past, the Delacroix family conducting rituals, sacrifices offered to a shadow that grew larger with every soul given. It means freedom for you, but a curse upon others, she whispered. The cycle begins anew, Lisa's eyes filled with tears. There has to be another way. The woman stood, shadows pulling at her feet like ink. There is none. Chapter 8. The final choice. Toby took a deep breath, stepping forward. If it's what you need, take mine and this. The woman tilted her head, considering him. A willing sacrifice. It may break the chain, but it must be given freely. Don't, Lisa cried, grabbing his arm. We'll find another way. We always do. Toby met her gaze, sadness softening his features. There's no other way, Lisa. We've seen what this curse can do. It'll spread. We have to end it here. The woman moved forward, her hand reaching out. Shadows coiled around Toby as if testing his resolve. He shuddered but did not pull back. I accept, he said, his voice steady, eyes locked with Alex and Lisa. Remember me. Before they could react, the room plunged into darkness, the whispers rising into a cacophony. The mirror shattered, sending shards raining down around them. When the noise ceased, Alex and Lisa stood alone. The golden light was gone, replaced by the cold glow of moonlight filtering through a cracked window. Toby was nowhere to be found. Days passed, but Toby did not return. His absence weighed on Alex and Lisa like an anchor. They reported him missing, but deep down they knew the truth would never be spoken. The whispers had stopped and the mark on Alex's arm faded to a pale scar, a reminder of their dead. They returned to Blackwood Manor one last time, not as trespassers, but as mourners. The house stood silent, as if finally at peace. The curse was broken, but the cost was a friend, a piece of their souls left behind in those haunted halls. As they turned to leave, the wind whispered one last secret carried on the night air. Thank you. And for the first time in weeks, the silence felt complete.